Anguilla rightly expects. In terms of responsibility, Madam Speaker, the property will be managed through the Ministry of Finance, consistent with the arrangements by which government assets are safeguarded and public resources are administered. At this stage, government's expectations are straightforward and in line with expected principles of use of public assets. Clear lines of authority and accountability, including defined approvals and documented decision-making. Appropriate administrative controls over access, use, safeguarding of government property and records, and day-to-day stewardship. Strong financial controls, including proper approvals, procurement discipline, contract management, and an auditable trail of expenditure, and regular reporting and oversight at a level proportionate to the scale and nature of the operation. Madam Speaker, we are also being realistic. This would be an asset located miles away in a different jurisdiction, and so the controls must not only be robust, but they must be practical and workable. The framework must ensure proper stewardship from Anguilla while recognizing the operational realities of managing an overseas facility. To that end, government will actively consult colleagues across other overseas territories to learn from their experience what works, what does not, and what governance arrangements best support effective overseas operations. We intend to apply those lessons so that Anguilla adopts a model that is sensible, modern, and fit for purpose. Finally, Madam Speaker, as the operating model is settled and the matter progresses, further information will be provided to this Honorable House at the appropriate stage, mindful of the need for transparency, while also respecting the requirements of commercial confidentiality during ongoing processes.
Thank you, Member. Question number 8. What is the estimated annual recurring costs, maintenance, insurance, security, property taxes, parking charges, and utilities, and for which financial year do these estimates apply?
Madam Speaker, while it would be premature to state a firm figure, government anticipates that the principal recurring costs will fall within the standard categories for a modest London office footprint, namely property management fees, utilities, insurance, routine maintenance, and proportionate security arrangements. The level of these costs is highly sensitive to the preferred option and the operating model. For that reason, government will provide the House with a validated annual estimate once the preferred option is sufficiently advanced and those obligations are confirmed through due diligence.
Thank you, Member. Question number 9. Were independent valuations commissioned? And if so, on what dates and by which firms?
Madam Speaker, government intends to proceed in a prudent and properly controlled manner, and that includes the use of independent professional valuation advice as part of the overall due diligence process. At this stage, as no acquisition process has started, I am not in a position to provide final dates and firm name for the valuation. However, once a preferred property is confirmed and Executive Council authorizes the submission of a non-binding offer, government will ensure that the necessary professional due diligence commences, which would include commissioning an independent valuation and, where appropriate, given the nature of the asset and the level of investment, additional valuation input to provide further assistance. Madam Speaker, consistent with commercial confidentiality and the need to avoid prejudicing negotiations, government will provide further information at the appropriate stage. Once the matter progresses beyond negotiations and due diligence to final decision-making and the requisite approvals, government will be in a position to confirm what was the outcome of the valuations that were commissioned and to provide the relevant details in a manner that protects the public interest while maintaining appropriate transparency.
Final question. What annual income, if any, is projected to arise from the property, and on what assumptions are these projections based?
Madam Speaker, government's primary objective in considering a United Kingdom property is strategic and operational to support official engagement, government business, and where appropriate, tourism and inward investment outreach. It is not being pursued as a commercial venture. That said, Madam Speaker, government is mindful of the need to manage the public purse responsibly and in examining options has considered configurations that could include space in excess of government's core operational requirements. Where the preferred option provides additional space of that nature, government's intention would be to explore rental arrangements so that the property is efficiently utilized and so that there is an opportunity to offset a portion of the ongoing operating costs. At this stage, however, government is not in a position to present a specific annual income figure, and the income potential will depend on the final option selected and the terms that can be reasonably achieved in the market. Any projections would require verified information, such as the amount of space available for lease, prevailing rental rates for comparable space, expected occupancy and lease terms, fit-out and compliance requirements, service charges, and operating costs attributable to the lettable area, and the time frame over which rental could realistically commence. Madam Speaker, should the government proceed to the point where the acquisition is sufficiently advanced and due diligence is on the way, the House will be provided with further information on the anticipated rental approach and the assumptions underpinning any projections consistent with the need for transparency and proper accountability, while remaining mindful of commercial confidentiality during live processes.
Any supplemental questions, member? We may proceed.
Government statements and recent developments, none. Papers, none. Reports from committees, none. Petitions, none. Government notices, none. Private members' notices, none. Motions, none. Oops, sorry. Motion 1 of 2026, 1/13 HOA, Customs Duty and Tax Exemption, Motion Regulations 2026.
I invite the member, the mover of this motion, motion 1 of 2026. I recognize the honorable member for Sandy Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion. Customs Duty and Tax Exemption, Motion 1, 2026 to 113 HOA, Regulations 2026.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, honorable members. Honorable member, do you wish to speak to the resolution?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, resolution made by the House of Assembly under Section 77(1) of the Customs Act, Revised Statutes of Anguilla, Chapter 169, and Section 3 of the Excise Tax Amendment Act 2020, was proposed and seconded in the House of Assembly on the 10th day of February 2026. Whereas a certificate of good standing that had not expired or been cancelled was produced to the Minister of Finance in relation to the importers. Be it resolved that under the powers contained in Section 77(1) of the Customs Act, Revised Statutes of Anguilla, Chapter 169, and Section 3 of the Excise Tax Amendment Act 2020, the House of Assembly exempts from customs duty and excise tax the goods imported into Anguilla specified in the schedule. The following conditions apply in respect of all goods exempted by virtue of this resolution. A, the goods shall not, within 5 years of the date of importation, be sold, exchanged, given away, or applied to any use other than the use specified in the schedule. B, on the expiry of 6 months from the date of importation and each successive 6-month period within the 5-year period after the date of importation, the importer shall certify to the Comptroller of Customs in a form acceptable to the Comptroller of Customs that he has complied with the conditions set out in paragraph A. C, upon demand made by a customs officer, the goods exempted under this resolution shall be produced or otherwise accounted for to the customs officer. D, in accordance with the Customs Administrative Cost Recovery Act, Revised Statutes of Anguilla, Chapter 170. At the time of import, the importer shall pay the customs administrative charge at the rate specified in the schedule. In accordance with Section 71 of the Customs Act, Revised Statutes of Anguilla, Chapter 169, the following apply in the event that a condition referred to in Section 1 of this resolution is contravened or not complied with. A, if any of the goods exempted under this resolution are sold, exchanged, given away, or applied to any use other than the use specified in the schedule within 5 years of the date of importation, the importer shall pay the customs duty and excise tax on the value of such goods at the rates specified in the integrated customs tariff at the date of importation. 2, the importer and any person knowingly concerned in such sale, exchange, gift, or unsanctioned use is guilty of an offense and may be arrested and is liable to a fine of $20,000 or 3 times the customs duty, excise tax relieved, whichever is the greater, or to imprisonment for a term of 2 years or both. The goods in respect of which the exemption was granted are liable to forfeiture. B, if the importer fails to certify that he has not sold, exchanged, given away, or applied the goods to any use other than the use specified in the schedule, the importer shall produce or account for the goods exempted under this resolution to the Comptroller of Customs. Any goods not produced or accounted for will be deemed to have been sold, exchanged, given away, or applied to some use other than the use specified in the schedule, and the paragraph A1 applied. And if any goods not produced or accounted for are subsequently found, they are liable to forfeiture. C, if the importer fails to produce or account for the goods exempted under this resolution upon demand by a customs officer, the importer and any person knowingly concerned in such failure are guilty of an offense and may be arrested and are liable to a fine of $20,000 or 3 times the value of the goods, whichever is the greater, or to imprisonment for a term of 2 years or to both. And 2, if any goods not produced or accounted for are subsequently found, they are liable to forfeiture. D, if the importer fails to pay the customs administrative fee at the rate specified in the schedule, at the expiry of 30 days from the date of delivery of a demand for payment made by the Comptroller of Customs, or such longer period as may be designated by the Comptroller of Customs, the importer shall pay the customs duty and the excise tax on the value of such goods at the rates specified in the integrated customs tariff at the date of importation. The importer and any person knowingly concerned in such failure are guilty of an offense and may be arrested and are liable to a fine of $20,000 or 3 times the value of the goods, whichever is the greater, or to imprisonment for a term of 2 years or to both. And the goods exempted under this resolution are liable to forfeiture. And, Madam Speaker, attached is the motion number 1 schedule, and the importer is the Anguilla Cricket Association / Leon Lake, and the purpose is a raffle. The period during which the importation is allowed is from November 5th, 2025 through 4th of November, 2026. The goods that may be imported is a vehicle. Rate of customs administrative charge, 5% administrative charge of the value of the goods in respect of which customs duty exemption is granted. And the duty and tax loss is EC $18,675.34. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Does any member wish to speak to the motion that is on the floor? I recognize the Honorable Member from West End.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, of course, I stand in support of this motion. Cricket is a very expensive sport. Cricket is also a sport that bonds us as a people, not just in Anguilla, but the Leewards and further afield, the West Indies, and not just in the West Indies, but West Indians around the world. The Anguilla Cricket Association, for a number of years, have struggled with fundraising. It is very difficult these days to get sponsorship as we've had in the past. So I must commend the members of the Anguilla Cricket Association with this initiative of going out there and finding ways to raise funds. And I know it's easy to criticize associations, to say they should be doing this, should be doing that, but they're volunteers, Madam Speaker. And for those persons out there who remember the great days when the West Indies were the kings of cricket, remember the days when Omari Banks, at the age of 20, batting against Australia in Antigua for 3 hours and 25 minutes to help the West Indies win. It was because of the cricket development in Anguilla. It's because a number of persons would have given up their time and their donations to help make it possible. In recent times, we have struggled with that support. But again, I stand to support the Anguilla Cricket Association in this venture, but also to challenge all Anguillians to go out and give support. Sure, you've got a chance of winning a new Jeep, but also it's not just about what you'll win. It's about the investment that you're making in the youth of our island. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Does any other member wish to speak? I recognize the single island-wide electoral district member, Brian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning to all the honorable members of this House and members in the gallery. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of this motion because besides cricket having struggles to raise funds, cricket is also youth development. Cricket is also community engagement. Cricket is also a national pride and an economic pillar. And the aim behind this administration when it comes to sports is also sports tourism. And if we're talking of sports tourism, this is an avenue in which cricket is creating to create funds or to find funds for them to support their development into the youth, into the sports in general. And this is the way we as a government can stand strong and support them so that they can, to encourage them to continue to grow and always be there behind them as a government that's willing to see them strive as the years come along. So our youth deserve this, the Cricket Association deserves this, and we will continue to support them as they continue to grow. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I invite the mover to reply, and then I will put the question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to thank the honorable members of this House, members of this honorable House, in supporting this motion that has come before the House today. And given that there's been no objection from the opposition, I take it that they are in support as well. And so I thank them as well for their support. No further comments, Madam Speaker, on this.
Thank you, Honourable Member. It has been moved and seconded that a motion 1 of 2026, 1 of 13, House of Assembly, Customs Duty and Tax Exemption Motion, Regulations 2026, be passed as a resolution of this House. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion has become a resolution of the House.
Personal explanations, none. Other business, government business, a bill for Port Nimara Marina, Anguilla, Both Slips Act 2025.
Honorable members, you will recall on the last occasion, this House did resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole, and we continue in the Committee of the Whole House. I, however, wanted to place on record my appreciation for the public officers that are in the gallery, and I wanted to also remind the honorable members and our visiting public officers that on the 14th of October 2025, this House passed a motion to adopt and endorse a strategic plan as it relates to modernizing the approach that the House takes, particularly as it relates to the committee phase of bills. The House, both sides, approved in their resolution that the strategic goal indicator 1 of 1.2 was such that the House would move in a direction where it would enhance the process for progressing bills through the House of Assembly. It states that the opportunities for public consultations, including at the committee level, shall be provided for all new bills as well as amendments at the Speaker's discretion. The House also endorsed in their strategic plan that this provision allows the House or the Speaker's position to bring in outside experts, as we consider you in your fields, just for the purpose of assisting the members, but also primarily for the purpose of assisting the public in understanding the bill that is before the House at any particular time. There's also Goal 9, Strategic Goal 9.5, where the House endorsed in their strategic plan that the modernization of the House would ensure that the public had access to the House of Assembly. And that is recognizing that we're all here to serve the public and do the work of the public. And for that reason, you have been invited. This as well specifically describes the types of expertise that would be summoned, stating in the goals that the public shall be engaged directly with the committee through, inter alia, public meetings, expert advisors, wide range of witnesses, calls for evidence on an ongoing but expanding basis. So we've started the practice, as you'll recall, during the budget's estimates period, and it was quite a new process, but well received. And I think both sides and all participants were actually happy and enlightened for participating in that level of review. I did, before convening today, receive some concerns from the Attorney General's office, and I wish to acknowledge those concerns. And those concerns are in relation to the role of the Attorney General's chambers as it relates to their role in terms of this process. And I wanted to place on record, because I hadn't had an opportunity to respond formally, that I am guided by the principles of legal privilege. At all times, privilege and confidentiality will be respected and honored, but it does not mean that those officers aren't allowed to participate in the process, which the House as a whole has recognized as an educational and a process that ensures transparency and collaboration with the public as well. So we honor and respect those values, and I recognize those as well. At this stage, I'm going to stand down for about 3 minutes, and it's really just to allow the officers to take their place. They're becoming familiar with this new approach, and I'll recite the procedure when we reconvene, if that is convenient. Okay. We'll stand down for 2 minutes, 3 minutes. This House resumes its committee. I welcome our public officers, and just so that we are informed as to who is with us, today I'd like to welcome the Registrar of Lands, Miss Angela Hughes, who is attending on behalf of the Director, who sends his apologies for being out of the jurisdiction. I welcome the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Franklin, and your public portfolio relates to the Economic Development Department. That's correct. I welcome our Principal Planning Officer. I also welcome our Chief Parliamentary Counsel from the Attorney General's Chambers and the Director of Maritime Affairs. Thank you for attending. We are in committee. The House has the opportunity to ask questions. You have opportunity to share any points that you wish to raise or to highlight. What I recognize, and most of you would have participated the last time that we had committee, what I recognize that in going through, and it's not a formal process, even though we're in committee, you can ask questions on either side, you just indicate. What I recognize is that as the questions developed, we realized that there were some persons that benefited from it, even though they're within the same department or office, there were things that were able to be shared that benefited not just who was in the room, but for the public. So I invite any members to put any questions to the panel that has taken the time to attend. I am aware that there were some questions circulated in advance, so I will open the floor for that process to take way. I recognize the honorable member for Road North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning and welcome again. I'll start with the Permanent Secretary. My first question will be to you. How does this bill, this Port Nemara bill, align with existing government policy?
Good morning. Good morning, members, Madam Chair. The primary purpose of the bill is to establish a clear public law framework for the regulation, administration, and recording of certain marine-related property and interests in Anguilla. From a policy standpoint, the government has an obligation to ensure that any interests capable of recognition or registration are administered within a transparent, orderly, and enforceable system. This is consistent with government's policy on land administration, ports oversight, and the protection of purchasers and the wider public interest. The bill aligns with existing government policy as set out in the Medium-Term Economic and Fiscal Plan 2026 to 2028, the 2026 Budget Address, and the People's Plan, which has been adopted as the government's policy, insofar as the bill strengthens governance, regulatory clarity, and public administration. At a broader policy level, the government has committed to the diversification of the economy, strengthening high-value tourism and marine services, and encouraging responsible private sector investment within a framework that is fiscally sustainable and properly regulated. Those objectives, however, are pursued through regulation oversight and the fostering of an environment for local and foreign direct investment. Accordingly, the alignment is with governance, public administration, and macro-level investment policy, not with any specific private activity.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin.
Are there any questions that any member would wish to direct and respond in relation to the response?
Okay, that's my next question. What are the anticipated economic impacts of the Port Nemara Marina on employment opportunities for local contractors and other businesses across Anguilla?
Thank you, member. I will try to answer that question in a more broader concept. So I wish to emphasize that at the onset that the bill is being advanced to create a regulated framework for for the administration and management of certain marine-related property interests, not on the basis of anticipated economic impact from any individual development perspective. In general, regulated marine and tourism activities, including marinas, can create opportunities for local contractors, suppliers, and service providers. The government interest is that such activity, wherever it occurs, takes place within a framework that supports stability, legal certainty, and effective public oversight. Where developments, including marina developments, proceed under existing approvals and agreements, those standard instruments usually include provisions on local participation, training, and the use of local labor and machinery. These provisions operate independently of this bill and do not determine its purpose. In general, marinas can and usually do support employment in marine services, hospitality, maintenance, retail, and port-related activities, and may give rise to wider spillover effects across transportation, provisioning, and tourism services. Marinas usually have multiplier and a ripple effect on local economies. Businesses around a marina tend to benefit from the services that go on inside of the marina. Any such economic effects are secondary, economy-wide outcomes, and do not inform the basis on which government advances legislation. The primary objectives remain sound regulation in the public interest.
I'll ask another question to you, Mr. Franklin. Has the ministry conducted an economic assessment to determine whether the projected benefits of the development outweigh potential environmental, social, or regulatory risk?
So, yes, there was a environmental impact assessment. This was in the 2000s, Sharon, in the early 2000s, 2006. And it was conducted in accordance with government's approved terms and informed by approvals granted for the marina component. Development will proceed and has been proceeding in phases subject to continued compliance with planning, beach control, port and harbors legislation, environmental standards, alien landholding license, and regulatory oversight. Importantly, the landside developments remain subject to further review and planning. In totality, the benefits as assessed by the EIA outweigh the environmental, social, and regulatory risks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Franklin. I now have some questions for Ms. Richardson. What considerations led to the decision to introduce a new standalone piece of legislation rather than amending existing laws governing land registration, marine infrastructure, or property rights?
Well, we did consider amendments to different pieces of legislation, but because this is a new concept and the amount of amendments that would have been needed to be able to clearly articulate the policy, we thought that that process would have been too cumbersome. Because ultimately, when you prepare legislation, you have to think about the user-friendliness, the ability of the public, the particular persons that the legislation is targeting, their ability to follow what is being done clearly. So when we looked at it, we thought that a standalone piece of legislation would have allowed us to translate government's policy in a more efficient, structured, and clear manner. So that was the main reason why we chose standalone legislation over amending one of the different pieces of legislations that this concept could have fallen under.
Next question. Does this bill establish a legislative precedent for future privately led developments in Anguilla, whether it be it marinas or other form of real estate infrastructure?
I do not think that this piece of legislation creates any legislative precedent. A one-off piece of legislation or doing something for the first time doesn't necessarily in itself establish precedent. You would have to develop a pattern of conduct over time to say that something actually establishes precedent. So I don't think so, Honorable Member.
But the fact that it's there now that we are about to pass this bill, doesn't that open up the doors?
Not necessarily. If an investor comes forward and they would like to use this as a guide, they could ask. You have to follow the various procedures already established by government in order for anything to happen. You could use it as a guide, but to say that you've established precedent is a different process. It's a more detailed, a more long-winded process to say that you have come to the point where you have established legal precedent. Yes, something could be done, so you could use it and say, yes, this happened, may I also have this privilege? But that is a different manner from saying you have established precedent. This is the first time that this is being done. It's a one-time matter as of now. It is not precedent.
Thank you. Ask our next question. Under the legislation, will board slips have the same legal status as immovable property, thereby allowing them to be sold, mortgaged, or transferred through inheritance?
The simple answer to your question is yes, but slips will be treated as property. If you go into the legislation itself, under Section 1, under the definition of property, you would see where birth slips is included. And also Section 1.3, it specifically states that birth slips constitute immovable property within the meaning of the Registered Land Act and may be the subject of ownership, lease agreements, mortgages, charges, and shall be treated in the same manner as a parcel of land.
Next question. What enforcement mechanisms or protective legal provisions exist if a board slip owner violates the environmental, customs, or immigration regulations while using the marina?
Now, customs procedures are governed by a Customs Act, and the immigration procedures, these are governed by the Immigration Act. So under each framework, there are already built-in procedures to determine how each subject will be treated. In relation to the environment, we do not have a standalone or comprehensive piece of legislation as yet governing environmental matters, but you do have different aspects of the environment or matters pertaining to the environment under different pieces of legislation. Like you have the Beach Act, you have Ports, Harbors, and Piers Act. Yes, you have that. That is a key piece of legislation that would help in the regulation of ports, piers, marinas. So, yes. Have I answered your question? Okay.
Thank you so much. And my final question to you is because we had a little back and forth here in this house trying to understand. So I just want to get your input as to what was the rationale for naming the legislation specifically as the Port Namara Anguilla Board Slips Act instead of using a broader title such as Anguilla Board Slips Act 2025?
A lot of consideration, a lot of debate went into determining what the name of this piece of legislation would be. And we settled on the Port Namara Anguilla Birth Slips Act as opposed to a more general name because of marketing purposes. Remember, we have to put this in the context of what is happening in Anguilla. We as a jurisdiction, we are new to the development of marinas. So we wanted to be able to give the investor and also give Anguilla a marketing edge. So we thought that this was a good way to be able to do this. It doesn't cost government any money. It doesn't cost the state anything to put this marketing tool in place. So the primary reason why we went a step further by adding on Port Namara Anguilla as opposed to just a general name of Anguilla Birth Slips Act was to position Anguilla as, I want to say the lead, to give us the edge in marketing, to sell bird slips for Anguilla, since this is a new concept for Anguilla.
I mean, I don't agree with the concept of marketing and so forth because it benefits Port Nevera. And I don't think anybody here in this honorable house opposed to the legislation. I think we all support the legislation, support the marina development and so forth. But I don't think that this is going to be the only marina that's going to happen in Anguilla. So does it suggest that every marina that comes to Anguilla will have legislation that specifically speaks to the name of that particular marina?
It doesn't necessarily suggest that. Remember, this is the first marina. If we have a next request to develop a marina, we are okay, let's call it forth. When we have that request, the minister at the time and the permanent secretary, we would have to meet to determine how we deal with that request. There are no hard and fast rules in terms of how we handle any requests going forward. We have to be able, at that point in time, based on the facts that we have, to develop a piece of legislation or a policy to help to drive that process forward in the best manner at that time.
I would dare say, in this particular marina is on freehold land, right? It will be separate, let's say, for a marina being developed in the Rendezvous Bay, which is owned by the Crown. And if this particular marina has legislation that's attached to its name, any future marina would say that is a competitive advantage over them. So obviously they'll want the name attached to the legislation that they ask for too. That goes without saying. But the legislation will somewhat be different if and when the new developer for a marina in the Rendezvous Pond comes forward as it relates to ownership, being able to secure loans and so forth, even though it's on a freehold basis.
But ultimately, what we need to develop would be general marina legislation. So we're hoping that over time, we'd be able to complete that process, and different investors would fall under a piece of legislation like that. But that also doesn't mean that we can't also follow this approach. So this is what I'm saying. You cannot prejudge what you're going to do at that point in time. It depends on what the facts are before the ministry and how we think at that time we would go about accomplishing, the objectives of the ministry at that particular point in time. This piece of legislation was drafted in this manner as well because of the time. We had about 2 months to produce this. So you had to weigh several different factors before you actually produced what you have before you.
I really and truly, we don't have an objection to the legislation, right? We have some concerns. I think all of us in this house have some concerns. And I think all of us in this house unanimously support the legislation. But we also have to consider that with this legislation is going to bring some undue pressures for future, for this government. This government may have a situation where the developers for the Savannah Bay, Style Bay Marina project comes forward in next year or two and say, listen, we are developing a marina that is we consider to be superior to that marina. And we need legislation that reflects that as well. From a marketing standpoint, it does help the marina. It doesn't necessarily help Anguilla because Anguilla marketing is good. We're going to have the yachts coming with or without a marina. A marina enhances the jurisdiction. But this legislation helps the marina developer and so forth, which is fine. We support it.
Exactly.
Sorry?
No, I said exactly. Sorry,
No, I looked up too. I know I heard something and I didn't know where it came from. But I want to at least safeguard the CPC. These are hypotheticals, remember our question, but still good dialogue, but all hypotheticals as well. So the questions, of course, are based on what is before us, but I see that the CPC agrees with you because she said exactly, right?
I think maybe this conversation is maybe worth more offline
Offline?
rather than in this context because, like I said again, We all support the marina development. We all support the legislation. We think it's a good thing, and we don't have an objection whatsoever. So I think any conversation relating to how we move forward should be held offline.
But
Not to say that we're not being transparent, but
No,
I
it's
don't think
actually
that-
fine.
yeah.
I didn't curtail that on any strict thing because I also recognize that people actually appreciate, and people are listening and they appreciate understanding. I'm learning things, everybody's learning things. That is the purpose of the process, so I'm not curtailing in that respect at all.
I understand
So
that,
you
but
can
when I think
develop your
about it,
question.
when I think about it, a lot of the things that I would like to say and ask isn't necessary for committee.
But ultimately, Road South, member for Road South, nothing is wrong with also crafting a piece of legislation to suit an ex-investor. We are all concerned about giving Anguilla that competitive advantage, as you said. We want to do the best for developing Anguilla at that point in time. So once the ministry brings a request, we sit and we do our research, we engage with one another. Sometimes we have very robust policy discussions, and we will take a decision that best, that would best help us to accomplish our goals at that point in time. Nothing is off the table, and nothing is also not automatic. It's a matter of a solution for what we have presented at that particular point in time.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. You've answered well. You know why I'm laughing. We'll now ask the Acting Director for Lands and Survey, Mrs. Hughes. So my first question, what procedures will the Department of Lands and Surveys follow to register individual birth slips under the new Act?
Good morning to all members and Madam Speaker. The procedures to be followed to register birth slips will be very similar to those that we currently adopt for any parcel of land in Anguilla, and will follow the requirements of the Registered Land Act. So the bill at Section 3 establishes a dedicated birth slips register, and that will exist within the land registration system. Each slip will be registered individually, and the details of ownership will be publicly searchable, just like any other land that's registered. So there will be clarity for owners, lenders, regulators, while we maintain the integrity of the system. As per Section 3 of the bill, which is similar to provisions in the Registered Land Act, there will be a land register page that's created for each birth slip, and on that page we'll be able to record the property, the number that's unique to that property, and detail the appurtenances, that's the benefits to the property, the name and address of the owner, and then the encumbrances section. So that will be a note of every encumbrance and every right that adversely affects the land. Each slip will then be identifiable also by reference to a map. So each slip will have what we're accustomed to seeing in terms of the registration section, the block, and then a parcel number which is specific to it. And that will match and tie in with the Port Namara Marina plan. And the plan must show each birth slip, the dimensions, its unique number, and the size vessel that it can accommodate, and details of common property. All the land that's not demised as a particular individual slip will remain under the control of the developer, the ownership of the developer. Regulations can be prepared to support the bill, and if any amendments are required to the forms that we use, that's an opportunity to make those amendments at that time.
All right, thank you. My next question, can you outline the survey methodology and technical standards that will be used to delineate, measure, and formally describe each birth slip?
To an extent, because the developer, the owner, is the entity that will undertake the surveying and then provide the data to the department for the birth descriptions which are detailed in the bill. So to that extent, the standards adopted in technical standards are within the control of the developer, who will then share that information with us to follow through with the registration. So our surveying section indicates that global navigation satellite systems, real-time kinetic systems, and total stations, which is the equipment that can be used to survey and collate the data that will be needed to measure the berth slips. More sophisticated hydro equipment can be used to map out the berth slips and the marina basin profile. Standard methodology that's used and accepted internationally would require a surveyor to consider the berth width. So then that should accommodate the vessel, the beam, with certain allowances for fenders and maneuvering. Berth length, that's generally measured as the overall length of the design vessel. And spacing, that requires adequate space for navigation, mooring, and for floating docks. There are specific technical standards that are used and accepted internationally, and they relate specifically to marina layouts.
Next question. Will transactions involving board slips such as sales, transfers, leases be subject to stamp duties, registration fees, or other government charges?
Yes, transactions will be subject to fees. So there will be government charges, and those are to be determined. So within the regulations, they can provide for, Section 7 allows for regulations to be prepared, and they can provide for government fees if required. So a fee schedule will be needed as it relates to the lodging of the documentation, the plan, and the creation of the registers. So it may operate something similar along the lines of what we do for condominiums. So that's a kind of guide, but we need to have a structure in place for the fees that will be charged for all the activities that pertain to creation of these slips. The registration fees for transactions are usually 100 to 120 EC, and they will apply, and stamp duties will apply on sale, transfer, and on leases.
Confirm the question. Okay. Next question. What administrative or legal process will apply if a board slip owner reaches a term of ownership or abandons their designated berth?
So before any slips are divested, there has to be a Port Namara berth slips master declaration as per Section 4 of the bill. So within that declaration, that should contain the rights and responsibilities of the berth slip owners. And the developer should detail the outcomes for breach of any obligations. Section 42E requires that the declaration states how disputes will be handled, and there's an emphasis on alternative dispute resolution methods. So from a wider perspective, there may be recourse to remedies in civil law, damages or other remedies, but the owner may face legal action for breach of contract and its specific contractual obligations. The developer has indicated that the berth slip is and will continue to be privately held property of a fee simple ownership nature. The contractual obligations between the seller, buyer, and the management will apply. Ultimately, if an owner abandons their slip, the managers can pursue contractual enforcement through non-litigation and court processes. This could possibly include registering a charge against the title where possible, obtaining court orders for injunctive relief, specific performance, or appointment of a receiver or manager.
I have a question, just for clarity. In the case of an act of God, I didn't see in if the legislation spoke to a situation where there's a hurricane or, God forbid, an earthquake, where the slips are destroyed and then they left without remedy. Do we have anything to enforce that it be remedied after an act of God?
Government has a right, especially if it's an alien land.
Could you use the mic? Can you get the mic?
Especially if it's an alien landholding license that's granted, to put conditions to Executive Council on the alien landholding license, including a bond if that is deemed to be necessary.
And I asked that question for unrelated reason. I think that we can learn from it, which is the dolphin discovery in Blowing Point, where the slips were built and Hurricane Irma came and destroyed the facility. And since then, it has been left in a state of disrepair where pieces of it, invariably comes ashore and creates a havoc. I think that could be instructive as it relates to how we move forward with these sort of things and how we can remedy that particular situation.
As I said before, if Executive Council so desire, for each alien and holding license that's granted for a bird slip, it can apply a bond to it, a bond condition. Yeah.
With that bond, you could possibly have funds in escrow that you can utilize in a situation if it occurs. Okay.
And my last question is a similar question for you, Mrs. Hughes. So in cases where a vessel becomes derelict while secured to a bird slip, which entity will bear responsibility for removal and any such thing?
So this will go back to the declaration again. In that declaration, we can really see how the rights and responsibilities of the berth slip owner and the developer work. And there's a discretion for the Registrar of Lands at section 4.2g to have included in that declaration any other matter which is desirable or relevant. So it's possible that something like that could be included within the declaration if required. And that could be made mandatory. So we could have a situation where the responsibility should lie with the berth owner, and then in the event that they don't do what's required, the developer or marina would then have to undertake that obligation. In addition to that, the Ports, Harbour and Piers Act, sections 23 and 24, have powers for the Superintendent of Ports to manage wrecks and abandoned vessels. And again, the license can have conditions concerning what should happen in this situation. Alien landholding license.
Thank you, Mrs. Hughes.
You're welcome.
We'll now ask Principal Planning Officer, Mrs. Robert Sarge. It's still morning, right? Good morning and welcome. My first question is, once the legislation is enacted, how will the planning approval process for the marina and its associated infrastructure be administered?
Good morning, everyone. All development on the island is regulated through the Land Development Control Act 2000, as well as the Building Act 2000, and their respective regulations. So nothing changes in this case. Those two acts will have jurisdiction over the marina. To date, the marina has permission in full for the seaward part of it. And all approved development is required to be carried out strictly in accordance with approved plans and associated regulations. So therefore, ongoing development of any kind in further phases that may come on board would have to go through the same process, whereas it would need planning approval.
Thank you.
Just a question as it relates to the supervisor of superintendent of ports. What role will the superintendent of ports have as it relates to enforcement and policing this? Maybe that question is for Sharma.
Good morning, everyone. The Superintendent of Ports, in pursuant to the Ports, Piers and Harbors Act, has some key regulatory functions to execute in relation to the marina, and those include ensuring safe navigation, as well as to implement a system that will enable them to govern the different procedures and processes that will be implemented in order to ensure that operations at the berth slips is done to a standard that is acceptable.
It is my understanding that we are void of a superintendent of ports. So if this is a key role, dealing with safety and the like, when do we expect to have this role filled?
I am unable to state exactly when the role will be filled, but I know that work is in progress to have the role filled. In the interim, the Maritime Administration will work collaboratively with the Department of Infrastructure to support our process in terms of assessing the bird slips.
Do you have a time frame which can be done? A year, 6 months, 3 months?
That is a decision that is above me, so I can't say exactly if it will be done within the next 6 months or 12 months, but I know that it is work in progress.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Roberts. My next question. Are there any areas where the Port Nimara Act may conflict with existing planning regulations or national development policies? And if so, how will such conflicts be resolved?
In short, no. There are no areas that we foresee that there should be any conflict, again, because all development is controlled via the Land Development Control Act and the Building Act. And although this is a special development area that has been created, there has been no special allowances and exemptions as far as development control is concerned that has been applied to this. And again, our laws are there in place to ensure that there is transparency and legal certainty and consistency.
Thank you. And my final question for you is, what monitoring and compliance mechanisms will the department implement to ensure adherence to planning conditions after permission is granted?
Our act speaks to enforcement measures that are clearly stated. So it will be followed through the same process. It's no different. I should say, though, we do have sort of not very strong enforcement measures, but that is something that has to be taken care of through, more robust legislation. But it will be business as usual, and the development will be expected to be built in accordance with approved plans, and any subsequent changes that may be necessary would have to come back to the Land Development Control Committee for consideration and approval.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Director of Maritime Affairs, just have a couple questions for you. And it's good day, because I'm not sure if it's morning or afternoon, so good day. What regulatory responsibilities will the Department of Maritime Affairs assume during both the construction phase and the operational phase of the boat slips?
The Anguilla Maritime Administration and Shipping Registry, acting through the Superintendent of Ports, will assume key regulatory functions pursuant to the Ports, Piers, and Harbors Act during both the construction and operational phases of the bird slips. During the construction phase, periodic inspections of the bird slips work will be conducted in collaboration with the Department of Infrastructure, as well as we will ensure the placement and maintenance of warning lights and signage to safeguard mariners operating within the area. Under Section 3 of the Ports, Piers, and Harbor Act, the Superintendent of Ports is responsible for administering and enforcing the Act and its regulations and managing marine navigational aids to support safe vessel movement. Section 4 further empowers the Superintendent of Ports to regulate and control navigation of vessels within the limits of any marina, port, or harbor, and the approaches thereto, and regulate the use of any marina or pier. As such, during the operational phase, the company will be required to implement a marine safety management system as approved by the Anguilla Maritime Administration. The Marine Safety Management System, MSMS, provides a comprehensive framework which includes the policies, procedures, including the berthing operations that will take place there, and clearly define responsibilities pertinent to the management and implementation of the system. So this system is basically to ensure that the marina operations are safe, maintained, and to an appropriate standard, and that the marine environment is protected from ship source pollution. It is through this system the oversight for compliance will be managed by conducting periodic inspections and audits against that framework by the superintendent of boats.
With all due respect to everyone, it seems to me as if the superintendent of ports have a very important role as it relates to this. And Ms. Richardson said earlier that we were able to turn around this very important piece of legislation in a matter of 2 months. I find it very difficult to understand why it's going to take 2 months, 6 months, a year to recruit a superintendent of ports. As a matter of fact, we need to recruit at least 2 superintendents of ports because somebody got to go on vacation at some point in time. So that recruitment needs to happen. Now we have the Honorable Deputy Governor here, and I know the questions is not directed to the Honorable Deputy Governor, but I would assume that immediately following this meeting, the Honorable Deputy Governor and yourself would get together to discuss the rapid recruitment of 2 superintendents of ports. You will not get an opposition from the opposition, and not speaking for the government, you will not get an opposition from the government as it relates to this very important role. It needs to be done, and it needs to be done expeditiously and quickly, rapidly. Any other objective you could find to describe the way we need to recruit these 2 persons.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. In 2024, the superintendent of ports position was advertised. Recommendations were submitted following the process in which we completed the review of the applications. As of now, I cannot state where we at, but I was informed that it is work in progress. I cannot state if it's going to be completed in the next 3 months, 6 months, or within 12 months, but that's just where I am in knowing the status of that. But as you have correctly stated, it is an important position to be filled, and I believe that our ministry will engage in promoting or taking the necessary steps to facilitate a quick turnaround in the process.
What process?
In the process of trying to recruit the superintendent of ports.
Maybe this question is to the Deputy Governor, because Ms. Hart said that the process was done in 2024. 2024, interviews occurred?
The process did not reach to the stage at which interviews were conducted. Recommendations were made for it to be re-advertised.
Recommendations were made for it to be re-advertised. 2024, we are in what year? 2026. We're in 2026, and here we are in committee stage, speaking about a very important regulatory aspect of the enforcement of this bill and enforcement of our territorial waters and land, and we still can't have 2 superintendents of ports, at least 1 to begin with, being hired. So I would like to know, and then I don't think any of us want to hear 6 months, 8 months. When will we recruit a superintendent of ports, at least once in the first instance, in another person, to ensure that this is carried out? And I know, with all due respect, sorry.
Is a question there? I see you're looking over
question
at
is to
the
Deputy
government
Governor.
side.
Yes, the
We're in
Deputy-
committee on the bill.
Yes.
So after we go on coffee break, let's talk about that point. I think it was Ms. Fleming that was speaking about the rule and the importance of the rule, and your understanding that it's relevant to this bill.
Right.
Okay.
It is important, very relevant to this bill.
But I don't think anyone on the panel is able to speak to.
And that is why we are putting the question to the Honorable Deputy Governor.
Oh, the question's put to the Honorable Deputy
Yes.
Governor.
Yes.
Okay.
The question is placed on the foot of my good cousin from South Hill.
Honorable Deputy, do you need to be rescued or you'll answer your cousin? Answer your cousin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To my dear cousin, member from Road South, I can give you every assurance that every effort will be made to expedite the recruitment of superintendent reports. I cannot sit here and give you an exact timeline. However, I can give you every assurance that the effort will be made to get it done sooner rather than later. I hope that is satisfactory to you, my dear cousin. Thank you.
Well, Minister Hodge, if it don't happen, just give me a shout.
Well, you'll have him here again. You can put the question to him again. I'll allow it since it's on record now. But I recognize it's connected to the bill. That's what you're saying? Okay, proceed.
Still to the Director of Maritime Affairs. How will waste management, including sewage, bilge water, and solid waste, be regulated for vessels moored within the marina?
Waste management for vessels moored within the marina will be regulated through the requirement for the operator to implement an approved waste management plan and provide adequate waste reception facilities for the collection and disposal of sewage and solid waste in accordance with applicable standards. Bilge water will be managed to the extent that is practical, given the absence of a local final disposal treatment facility. Accordingly, it will be addressed through operational controls, including the provision of oil-absorbent pads and procedures to prevent discharge into the marine environment. Where feasible, and this may have already started in terms of in the planning process, the operator may also be required to construct an approved water treatment plan consistent with regulatory requirements that allows one to treat that wastewater on the property. Oversight of waste management systems will be coordinated in conjunction with key authorities, including the Department of Health Protection, and compliance will be monitored through inspections and interagency coordination to ensure protection of public health and the marine environment.
Thank you. And my final question. If pollution occurs while a vessel is moored to a board slip, how will liability be assigned, and which authority will lead the response and enforcement actions?
If pollution should occur while a vessel is moored at a bird slip, liability will be assigned in accordance with the applicable legislation, with primary responsibility resting with the vessel owner or the operator responsible for the discharge, in keeping with the polluter pays principle. Where pollution results from failures in marina infrastructure or operations, liability may also be extended to the marina operator. The authority responsible for leading a response and enforcement actions will depend on the type of pollution that occurs. For example, in the event of an oil spill, the Department of Natural Resources will be notified in accordance with established notification procedures and will lead the response. If the spill exceeds the response capacity of the vessel or the marina operator, the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan will be activated. Enforcement actions will be undertaken by the relevant authorities as prescribed under those plans.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I don't know if anyone else have any other questions, but that's
Thank
it
you
for
for your
me.
questions. Are there any other questions that, sure.
I just have a question as it relates to spills. What piece of legislation do we have that deals with the spills? And who's responsible for cleaning up the spills if the spill happens?
So the legislation in place is across different pieces of legislations. It's not one specific legislation. However, we are currently working on a marine pollution legislation to support this further. There are orders as well that has been extended to Anguilla through the United Kingdom that enable us to develop plans specifically for an oil spill incident. The second question was who is responsible? The authority for an oil spill response lies with the Department of Natural Resources. However, it's a coordinated effort in terms of responding, so it will include other agencies such as the Anguilla Fire and Rescue Service, the Department of Infrastructure. You will have fisheries, well, that's a part of Department of Natural Resources, my apologies, Department of Health Protection, etc. We just had some training in that as well. So we have also community members that will be able to give a lending hand in a response as well, because it may exceed the capacity that government has.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to put any questions? If not, we can proceed with considering the bill. Any other questions? Does the panel wish to share anything else? If not, I will speak on behalf of the members on both sides and the staff to just thank you for being open and willing. It was not that bad, and it's very helpful. And I can assure you, and when you leave, you'll know that the public does accept, appreciate, and are grateful for the clarity on these things. I learned things, we all learned things, and legislation isn't static. We've also highlighted things that have to be looked at again, and I appreciate that. At this stage, I call upon the clerk to proceed.
Clauses 1 through 9.
Members, I put the question that clauses 1 to 9 does stand part of this bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
Schedule 1.
I put the question that Schedule 1 stands part of this bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
Schedule 2.
Before you, members, is a bill with a second schedule, Schedule 2. It is the Port Namara Berth Slips site plan. I put the question that this forms part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
The title.
Members?
Madam Chair, I would like
Yes,
to
honourable member.
move that the title be amended by removing 2025 and replacing it with 2026.
Do we have a seconder in respect of the motion before us to amend the title to reflect Port Namara Marina Anguilla Berth Slips Act 2026 as opposed to 2025?
Madam Speaker, I raise a second.
Thank you for seconding. It has been moved and seconded that the title be amended to reflect 2026 as opposed to 2025. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. I therefore put the question that the title now shall stand as part of the bill, Port Namara Marina Anguilla Berth Slips Act 2026. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
The enacting clause.
I put the question that the enacting clause at page 1 of this bill stands part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The House now resumes its sitting. I will allow our panel to discharge. They can stay in the gallery if you wish to be present for the third reading. I'll just allow a few minutes for them to be comfortable. This House now resumes its sitting. From the committee stage, I call upon the minister as the mover of this bill to report on the committee stage.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to report that the bill shortly entitled Port Namara Marina Anguilla Berth Slips Act 2026 has passed through committee stage with amendment and is ready for its third reading.
Thank you, honorable member. It has been reported that the bill has passed through the committee stage with one amendment, that the name now reflects 2026. I call upon the clerk to read the bill.
Port Namara Marina, Anguilla Boat Slips Act 2025, third reading.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the bill shortly entitled Port Namara Marina Anguilla Butt Slips Act 2026 be read a third time and passed.
Seconder?
Speaker, I raise a second.
I put the question, it has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Port Namara Marina Anguilla Berth Slips Act 2026 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
The purpose of this act is to establish a legislative framework to provide for the registration of both slips in Port Namara Marina and to provide for related matters.
I hereby declare that the bill has been read a third time and passed, and that it shall be titled a bill for Port Namara Anguilla Berth Slips Act 2026. Thank you, members. Thank you to the officers, and the clerk may proceed.
Private members' bills? None. Private bills? None. Other orders of the day?
I do invite members to make any submissions or representations in respect of any other orders of the day. If there are none, then I invite a member to move that this Honorable House stands adjourned to its next sitting.
Madam Speaker. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Well, we'll second, I'm sure. Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to request an adjournment or rise on a motion for adjournment of this Honorable House until
24th,
24th of February.
I presume, but the 24th would be the next sitting.
On the, we can adjust after. On the
We'll
24th
adjourn
of
and then we'll
February.
address the dates.
Yeah, on 24th of February, 2026. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Do I have a seconder to adjourn to the 24th of February?
Madam Speaker, it just underscores that we are aligned in many things, Madam Speaker. I rise a second.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded that this Honorable House stands adjourned until the 24th of February, 2026 at 10 a.m. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. This Honorable House stands adjourned.